It just gets right into everything that's going on. And some cool facts just about it. It never actually mentions God in the book of Esther, which is the coolest thing ever because he is implied in such a massive way. And there's a whole Jewish festival surrounding Purim, which is based off of this book in the Bible. And so to me, it's like one of the biggest books of God incidents is that is there. And that's why it's such a fun read for me because I'm just like, it's great. He's not actually mentioned, but you can see his hand throughout the entire book completely. So I'm going to just go through a bit of a summary, and then I encourage you guys, it's a pretty short read. I don't know, for me, like 20, 30 minutes of Bible reading is short. That's not a very long time. So at home, even if you divvy that up throughout the week and read like a chapter or two during the week, you'll be done by the end of the week. And it's a fun read. So for homework, guys, you guys know me, I like to give you homework. Read Esther. Okay, enjoy it, have fun with it, pray about it, learn from her, and grow from there. So let's have fun. We had King Xerxes, and he went to war, and he lost. Okay, but he's a very wealthy king, and he comes back, and it's crazy because he actually throws the biggest party I have ever heard of because it goes for about 6 months, 180 days. He takes all his nobles, all his important people. I just, my mind is blown. I'm like, you go to war, you lose, you come home, and you have a throw a party, and not just any party, a party for 180 days, okay? And I'm blown away. I'm just, wow, how do you even afford something like that? But very, very rich king. Then he takes an additional 7 days and he lets everyone inside like his inner courts to celebrate as well for 7 days. And there you go. During that 7 days, he asks for his queen to come be displayed before everyone. She was known to be incredibly beautiful, and I guess he just wanted to show off. Okay. Now she, at the same time, was throwing a party for her own group of ladies, and she actually refused and said, "Yeah, no, I'm not going." Didn't want to go, and so he asked his advisors, and was like, "What do I do with this?" And they said, "Well, if you allow this to continue on, then everyone in the whole nation, all the wives are going to be disobeying their husbands." Right? It's setting a precedent. So you have to do something about this. And so he banishes her, okay? Which is kind of terrifying. Like, you're the queen, and then you get banished. Like, he never wants to see you again. You're just gone, okay? And so that's kind of the precedence that's there. Now, of course, he needs a new queen. And so he goes out looking for, and this is what happens, is they go out and they gather all kinds of eligible virgin women to come and be presented for a whole year. There's a whole year regiment of beautifying yourself. And the Bible talks about how there's like 6 months of like bathing in myrrh and perfumes, and then another 6 months doing something else. And I'm just like, what? Like a whole year. And then they get presented before him, the king, and for him to pick his new queen. Okay, and this is where Esther enters in. And I want to give you the perspective of Esther, okay? Because due to battles when she was much younger, her parents were killed. Okay, so if you can picture an orphan girl, okay, who then gets adopted by Mordecai. Okay, that's like her uncle. And he really takes the time to teach her God's ways, to teach her all about like who he is, and really like ingrains in her all about God and the festivals and what it means to be part of Israel and the Jewish nation. And so he really, really pours into her. Okay, so parents killed off, she's got her adopted father, and then picture that she gets ripped away even from him because she's of eligible age and a virgin, and therefore like sequestered away from everything she knows and brought in to be like for a year to beautify yourself. Okay, now I know that's kind of like, well, hold on. You get to be like part of this like inner court where you're taken care of, well fed, all to be displayed before the king. That might sound good if that was your intention, that you wanted to be a queen one day, but if you didn't, and you just wanted to be with your uncle and serving God and doing, like lead your own life with your own perspectives and what you wanted to do, then that's awful because he just tore you away from everything you would know. It wasn't bad enough that you were torn away from your parents, torn away from your uncle. Now it's just like, now you're in competition with a whole bunch of other women, and that's become your life. Okay, so it's not, I speak really fast, sorry. It's not a very pleasant thing. It's not a very, exciting prospect to be in. Like I said, just Think about it. For a year, you're in competition with other people. The only family that you have left, you can't even have that much contact with anymore. He's like in the outer courtyard most of the time. And so, yeah, that's the situation that begins to take place. Okay? Then what happens is that Mordecai, her uncle, he does have the king's ear on occasion. He is part of like helping out around the king's stuff. And he overhears a conversation where they plan, like the nobles, there were 2 nobles that were standing guard, that were in charge of like taking care of the king. And Mordecai overheard that they were planning to assassinate him. Okay? So Mordecai goes to Esther because Esther, so by the way, she ends up being picked. So she ends up becoming the new queen. Okay? And right there, when you look at this, you realize, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? But it's a God thing. God needed her to be there. God needed her to have the king's ear. Okay, and so God is the one who appointed her to be there, which is the coolest thing ever, because sometimes people think it's like, I got a promotion. I'm like, then you found favor, and it's because God allowed you to find favor with your boss to get that position, right? Because I know it's God who plays behind the scenes. You may not believe it, but he does. And so like when you read Joseph and it says, and he found favor with Potiphar and he found favor with the jailer, that's all God's doing, right? So Esther found favor and she became the queen, okay? So Mordecai goes to Esther, Esther goes to the king, and it's like, there's this plot that they're trying to kill you, okay? And then an investigation is done and it's discovered that it's true, okay? Now, what's interesting when you read it, and we'll read it in a moment, is that Esther, like, so it gets uncovered, and it gets written down who's the one who said everything. So Mordecai's name gets written down as, like, he's the person who found these assassins, okay, and saved the king, okay? But no honor is given to Mordecai at that point in time. It's written down, but so did you ever feel like sometimes bad people, like all the good stuff happens to bad people and all the bad stuff happens to good people? It kind of looks exactly like that. It's like, hold on, Mordecai just saved the king's life. You'd figure he'd get some kind of honor. You'd figure he'd get some kind of something from that, right? And instead, not at all, okay? So Haman ends up, so I'll read the verse in a moment. Haman ends up being our villain of the story. Now, when you actually pay attention to the lineage of Haman, and you'll see that Agag word there, Agag, you'll find that, so when you're reading about King David and King Saul and the things that was going through there, Agag, the last name Agag, was actually like of the lineage of people that he was supposed to kill. Okay, when God's like, go in there and I want you to kill everybody, and he spares the king and he spares like a lineage of people and God gets upset at him, it's actually from that lineage that Haman comes from. Okay, now that's just very interesting because he shouldn't have been around if Saul had been obedient to God. Okay, but he's our villain of the story, and he comes. Here we go. Great, I didn't write it. I think I wrote it there. So we're in chapter 2 of Esther, and this is what it says. So I'm doing the end of chapter 2, beginning of chapter 3, just because of the transition. And I'm just like, hold on, Mordecai does something awesome and Haman gets the glory? Like, here we go. Verse 22, chapter 2 of Esther. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the 2 officials were impaled on poles. It seems to be the common way of like showing the rest of the world what happened and how they're dealt with so that it doesn't happen anymore. So the officials were impaled on poles. All this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. Okay? Now we get to chapter 3. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of, oh boy, it doesn't say oh boy, it says Hammedatha. There we go. The Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than of all the other nobles. So when I read this, like, and I transition from one to the other, I'm just like, hold on. Mordecai, who just saved the king's life, no mention. No mention of honor, no mention of, hey, thank you for saving my life. It does mention, let me go back here, all this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. So they wrote it down, right? And Mordecai gets the credit, but then some other dude who comes in takes, like, all the glory. He gets, like, put to the highest place. And so again, you ask the question, God, why is it that the bad people end up in those positions and the poor good people end up with like all the bad stuff happening to them? What is going on. And truly, this is like what goes out throughout Esther. And this is the beauty of reading Esther. Is you read all this where it looks like wickedness is winning over and over and over again. But instead, as you get closer to the end of Esther, you realize that it was all part of God's plan so that he may have the glory, so that he could save like all of Israel. And we'll get there in a moment. But that's the beauty of it, is it's just continuous like, oh my goodness, why is wickedness always winning? Why are the evil people always winning? Why is this is what's happening? But it is still all part of God's plan. I know some people like to battle me when we speak of politics, and it's like, listen, I don't have to like who's the leader, but I do have to honor him, because God appoints all leadership over our lives. You think David liked having King Saul above him? Right? As a little boy, he went there to help him out. He went there to be like, hey, what do you need? I'm here to help you, to serve you, to, and when no one else would step up before, David and Goliath's story, he stepped up, right? And then Saul eventually goes mad and throws spears at David to try and kill him. You think that's a great mentor to have? You think that's a great boss to have? A boss who's flat out trying to kill you? Not once, twice he threw spears at David, and then finally David had to run away to try and not die, okay? And so you ask the question, well, what? No, because I truly believe that shaped David's life and shaped his leadership. And so you can ask the question, God, why is this person placed above me? And maybe that's not for you to figure out. But I truly believe that all leadership is placed there by God. Now, whether they do godly things or not is a whole other story. Whether or not they honor God is a whole other story. But I believe that leadership is always placed there by God for God's purposes. Okay? And who am I to ask the questions on that one? He's God. Okay? Oh, fantastic. There we go. Okay. So, Haman gets into he just continues to be honored. And because he's honored over absolutely everybody else, there was everyone kind of, whenever he walked by, they would bow to him. Everyone would they respected him because they feared him. He was just almost as powerful as the king, okay? And so everywhere he went, everyone was just kind of there he is, there he's walking. And he really enjoyed that. It puffed him up, if you will. Except when he walks by, of course, Mordecai, who refuses to bow to anyone except God, right? And so immediately he begins to, it bothers him. It's everyone bows me. Everyone gives me the respect that except this guy. What's up with this guy? He finds out he's of Jewish nature, okay? And he goes before the king, and he's like, listen, there's a bunch of troublemakers that live among your people. Okay, they're out there and they don't follow your decrees. They don't listen to you. And if you don't squash them now, they're going to come and rebel against you in the future. You need to do something about this. And he does his best to convince the king. He even puts a whole bunch of money in the king's coffers and says, you should send out this decree that they're going to be killed off. You should kill them off. That's what you should do. Okay, and he listens. Okay, now at about this time, there's this 30-day period of time where Esther doesn't seem to hang out with the king anymore, which probably means he's hanging out with the other ladies who are around. And so all of Israel, when they get this decree, they all start fasting. They all start mourning. They all start grieving. They're like, what are we going to do? Now, what's interesting is, I don't know about you, but if all of a sudden there was a decree saying that there were people hunting me down on a specific day to come and kill me, I would get out. Why am I hanging around here for? But not the Jewish nation. They trusted God more, and they stayed. They went into mourning, and they prayed, and they fasted, but they weren't willing to move. So, this is a cool thing, and this is the whole part of the festival for Jewish people, and this is why it's called Purim. Purim are these two lots, these two stones that you would throw, and you would ask God to give you direction, okay, and to achieve answers. It's the same thing that's casted when you think of Jonah and the whale, and they cast it to see lots to see what was going on. It's the same thing that when you read throughout Moses' history, they had this cool breastplate that had all these gems in it, and there were these two stones called Purim and Thurim, and they would throw these down in beseeching God for an answer. Okay, so Haman takes these and says, "Dear God, when should we go out and kill Israel?" Okay, and it's interesting. So it ended up being a year later is when the date would be set on March 7th, and it would be death to all the Jews. And so it's interesting because I believe that God, as much as Haman got the answer like from God, maybe he was looking at a different God, but it was our God who responded and made it that day, and he made it work towards his favor. So it's amazing how evil, even when beseeching God, God still made his plan unfold. Okay. And I just wanted to remind you again of Joseph. So Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, it says, you intended to harm me. This is Joseph talking to his brothers, okay, who left him for dead. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Okay, and that just like resounded in my heart because that's exactly what's happening here. And it's like such a declaration. It's like everything around me looks like it's coming against me to harm me, but God is actually intending it for good. He's going to turn it to his favor. He's going to turn it to get his will done. Okay, so like I mentioned, Esther ends up out, I don't want to say out of favor because it's not that she didn't have favor. I guess his attention was just elsewhere with the king. And so there's 30 days where she didn't see him, okay? And Mordecai comes and is like, hey, Esther, you need to go talk to the king about this decree. We're all going to get killed off out here, you know? And her initial response is like, okay, so you know, anyone who approaches the king without an invitation, there's an option that takes place. He pulls out this golden scepter, and if he points it at you, he'll listen to you, okay? If he doesn't, you end up killed. You've bothered him, you've entered his awesome time schedule, and you're not worthy, and you end up being killed off. And so she's like, if I go in there, he doesn't point that gold scepter at me, I end up dead. Like, okay? And Mordecai comes with this awesome thing, okay? Esther chapter 4. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. Listen to Mordecai's faith. Like, it's beautiful. He's like, if you don't go talk to him, God is still going to do what he's going to do. He will still save us. He will still come through. But there will be consequences because, you know, I believe we were meant to be the ones who spoke up at this point in time. Okay? So, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. So I underlined that part. I bold, whatever you need to make that really important when you read it, that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. So Mordecai says something that has stuck with me all my life. And I've always asked the question, all right, Luigi, what if, like, you were born and this and this and this happened in your life that is horrible, and you had to experience an immense amount of pain and suffering and feelings of abandonment and alone and depression and people coming against you and being picked on and bullied and so forth and so on, and you go through life and it just is constant, and life seems like such a miserable thing to live, okay? But it all comes down to one moment that God has prepared, that one moment in your life that he's going to ask you to step up, that he's going to need you, and you can change the world through it. Is life worth living? Is life worth living just for that one moment and all that suffering and all that pain and all that stuff that's going on? Is it worth living, A? And B, are you ready to do what God asks for that moment? And so I've always said to myself, listen, Luigi, if you live an entire life of pain and suffering, but you have the opportunity to change someone else's heart for God, to show them how much God loves them, how much he cares for them, and change their heart, then life is worth living. And so that's exactly what Mordecai tells Esther. He goes, how do you know that God didn't prepare you, that your parents died, that you ended up being my daughter, adopted daughter, that you ended up being the queen for just this moment, to save all of Israel? He goes, if you don't want to do it, fine and dandy, but there will be consequences, most likely you, because you're Jewish too, and this Jewish decree goes out that the Jews are going to be murdered off. Who's to say that someone's not going to come after you? What, just because you're the queen? Once the king speaks something, it's law. Okay? You'll see that later on, because when he makes the decree for them to be killed, he can't unmake it. Okay? So he actually makes a second decree to not nullify, but to remedy the situation. We'll get there in a moment, okay? But like once the king speaks, it's law. That's it. Like it has to happen. He's not even allowed to break his own word, okay? But there it is. What if her entire life was orchestrated, ripped away from even Mordecai, put into this home, to be beautified for a year, to end up being the queen, not necessarily to even a guy you may like very much, okay? All for this one opportunity, right? And so we need to ask the same question. When she thinks about it and she begins to pray about it, she simply asks and she says, Mordecai, please go tell this to everyone else. And she makes a decision and she goes, I'll do it. I'll do it. And if I die, I die. Those are her words. Next slide, you'll see it, okay? But she flat out says, listen, if I end up dying, then I end up dying. But I'll do this. I will do this. All I ask from you is, can you please fast and pray for me? Sometimes, I don't know, I feel like we want to do things for God, but if you don't have a backup team that is praying for you, it is incredibly important that you have people covering you in prayer. Anytime you go out, anytime you're like, if you're going to an event and you're going with the heart of like, I want to serve God, right? I don't know how God's going to use me in this situation. You need to have people uplift you in prayer. Okay, so she's like, I'm about to go through this difficult decision in my life, okay? And I'm all in. I am all in, okay? But can you please fast and pray for me? We need to have that. We absolutely need to have that. It's awesome that I can give you a list of people that are actually going through things that they have identified, but we need to all be praying for each other all the time. So if you, at the end of your day, have been like, oh, I don't know who to pray for, picture the sanctuary, picture the parking lot, picture people online, I don't know, however you interact with us, okay? Picture someone and begin praying for them. We can all use prayer. This church can use prayer, and each of you individually can use prayer, because you will come across moments in your life where God's going to ask you to step up. And how awesome would it be that you have a team behind you that you don't even know about that has been praying for you? I truly believe when I was in Bible college and going through things that I had a team back at my home church that was praying for me, that they helped me overcome, whether I got to see them or not, that there was a team of people. And later on in life, sometimes you bump into them, and they'll be like, I remember when you first went to Bible college, and I remember God placed you on my heart, and I remember praying. I remember praying for you. And you know what that feels like, even like years later, to be talking to someone and then say something like that? We need to be praying for each other. So she asks everyone and says, hey guys, will you fast and pray for me? Esther chapter 4, verse 16. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in and see the king. If I must die, I must die. Can you hear her resolve? I'm going to go see the king. This is it. This is what I need to go do. You're right, Mordecai. I'm not just going to leave it out there. I'm going to go and speak to the king. And if I die, then I die. How often? Like, I don't know if you guys have you given your heart to the Lord? And when you gave your heart to the Lord, did you sit and say, Lord, if you ever ask of me to come across a moment like that, I am all in. And when you gave your heart to the Lord, you weren't like, okay, God, I'll listen to 90% of what you say, but that 10% is mine. Okay? That's just not the way it works. Either you love the Lord with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, all of who you are, and give yourself up for him in the same way that he gave up his life for you. Or anything you hold back ends up being a weight against God. When you give your heart to the Lord, you just got to be all in. All of who you are in service and love for God. And so Esther was all in. If I must die, then I die. No matter how this unfolds, I'm going to do what God has asked me to do. And if I die, I die. I'm all in. And I know death might seem a little bit scary, but we're Christians. We have the hope of eternal life. We know that death here is like temporary. Like this world isn't exactly the best anyways. It's not necessarily such a horrible thing that we go. I worry more about my children, my wife, and who I leave behind. But I'm going for eternity with God. And when it's your time, you're going with eternity with God, where there will be no more tears, where there will be no more suffering. Death isn't final, is my point. It's not this like, oh, something to be like mortified of or terrified of, or just like, oh, there's death. It's like, oh, death just means I'm done over here, and I get to be up there for the rest of eternity. It's an exciting kind of thing. No, I'm not. Okay, anyway. I'm just thinking some little kids like misinterpreting this and be like, I want to go see Jesus. It's like, yeah, well, when it's your time. I have a nephew, okay, who flat out was like, Mom, I'm okay to die. I just want to go see Jesus. And it's like, yeah, okay, but you're alive now. And let's enjoy that and do what God has asked us to do now. His heart was just so innocent, so pure, so beautiful. Wonderful kid. Anyways, I'm digressing. She needed prayer. And again, I asked the question, why didn't Israel run? You know, you're going to be hunted down. Israel's like, no, we're going to fast and pray and believe in God. He'll protect us. He'll provide for us. We're not running away from here. They stand their ground. Okay? And I think of the perfect timing of absolutely everything. Okay? So she goes before the king. And, you know, I can just picture like in movie terms, you know, there's this tense moment where she like walks in, right? And it's like, he picks up the gold scepter and he ponders for a moment, you know, and it's, you know, she's holding her breath. It's just like, oh my goodness, am I going to die? And then it's finally pointed her way. Okay. And it's just like, you know, that tense moment. Okay. But he points it her way. And I truly believe it's still God who allowed him or her to have favor in the king's eyes. Okay, because he points it to her, even after not seeing her for 30 days. Okay, and the way it talks about it when you read it in the Bible, I'm inspired. I'm just like, no, he didn't forget about her for a moment. This was his queen whom he cared about. And I was just like, oh. So he points, and it's like, ask what you're going to ask. And even up to half the kingdom, half of everything I have, I'll give to you. Like, that's his heart. And I'm just like, whoa. He wasn't disturbed at all. He was ready to listen to her petition. And she asks, okay, and I'm just half expecting as I read this for her to just be like, you're killing my people. Nope. She's like, all I ask is that you let me throw you a wonderful dinner tomorrow with Haman as well, with her enemy, okay? And it's like, will you come to that banquet? Okay? And I think of the timing of all of this, and I think of how important it is that we're obedient to God. Because sometimes the details don't make any kind of sense. Hey guys, I need you to blow some trumpets and walk around the town 7 times. And then you'll win. What? Have you seen those walls? Walls of Jericho for those. Anyways. Like, God can ask some of the most ridiculous things ever. Throw your staff down. Yeah, I'm not sure how that lets all of Israel go, but sure, God. Put your staff in the water. You know, I think of some of the most ridiculous things that God has asked people to do, and then they do them, and God comes through, and it's just like, whoa. So I think of her obedience, and it's like, she didn't come with her petition right away. She's like, let me throw you a banquet. And she throws the banquet. And then the king at some point during the banquet is like, okay, so what is it that you're asking me of? She's like, actually, can you let me throw you a second banquet tomorrow with Haman there as well? Okay, and it's all about perfect timing because Haman leaves this and he is so full of himself. Okay, he's just like, oh my goodness, like I am here dining with the queen and the king, and I'm being invited to go spend more time with them, and I have the highest honor. But there's this guy Mordecai who still won't give me the respect I deserve, even after I'm like about to kill all of Israel. So he goes home upset, and he builds a 75-foot pole to hang Mordecai on, to impale him on. 75 feet. I don't know if you can picture that. It's 20 meters. It's really, really high up because he wanted to make the biggest statement ever. Okay? And he talks with his friends, and they're all like, yeah, this is what you should do. This is what you should do. And it's interesting because that night, King goes to bed. He can't sleep. And he's frustrated. He's like, I can't sleep. So I picture when I read this that he wanted to be bored to sleep. You know how we count sheep? Or we say we count sheep, and you're looking to be bored at something, okay? And I picture the king there like, oh, I just can't sleep. Why don't you read me some old history stories, okay? And so they actually go through the history of the kingdom, of things that have happened, okay? And so the person reading then stumbles across Mordecai's story. And it's like, and then there were 2 assassins that were sent out to kill you, who had plotted and planned to murder you. And Mordecai let you know what would happen, and you were able to stop them. And then the king realizes, well, wait a second. Did we ever reward that guy? Like, this is way later. He's like, did we ever give him a reward for doing that? And he's like, no, we didn't do anything. And so the king comes back and is like, goes to Haman. This is after the first banquet, okay? Goes to Haman and is like, hey, Haman, if you had someone who did something awesome for me and I really, really wanted to reward them, what should I do? In Haman's perspective, he must be talking about me because I deserve all the honor. He plans on doing something good for me. Okay, this is what you do. Oh, awesome king, okay? You put him on a horse that you've ridden before, and you put him before everyone and declare to everyone, this is how the king honors people that he favors, okay? And then put a robe of purple and blue. I didn't study the significance of the colors, but anyways, put your robes on him, okay? And parade him around, okay? And then the best part is the king's like, oh, that's a great idea. Thank you very much. Mordecai, will you get on this horse so that I can parade you around because you saved my life? The turn of events, okay? Because Haman's there wanting to just puff himself up right after he built a stinking 75-foot pole to impale Mordecai on. And there's God, and there's the king who's like, you saved my life. Let me give you all the honor and lift you up, okay? And I'm just like, told you, Esther's a fun read, okay? So Haman's a little bit taken aback by that, but then they come to the second banquet, okay? Doom, 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 doom. It's true, at that moment you must be thinking like, it looks like after he builds that 75-foot pole, that evil's going to win, right? As you're reading and Haman's just describing all this, it's like, oh my goodness, why does it seem like evil's going to pull this one off? Chapter 7, the queen Esther answered, if I have found, so she's finally telling them what's going on, okay? If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life and this petition. Spare my people. That is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. Can you hear like the humility in which she's coming before the king? She's like, if we were just sold off into slavery, I wouldn't even be discussing this with you because I wouldn't want to waste your time. But my life and the life of my people are looking to be destroyed and annihilated. So all I'm asking for is for you to spare my life and my people's life. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, well, who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, an adversary, an enemy. This, and I picture her pointing because they're having the banquet together, this vile Haman. From the guy who's looking to puff himself up in every possible way. From the guy who built a 75-foot pole to put Mordecai on. Okay? And there's the queen who's like, King, all I ask is that you spare my life. And he's like, well, who did this? Who's out to kill you? Who's out to annihilate you and your people? And it's like this guy right here who we're eating with. Okay? Now, I give props to the king because the king decided to go for a walk. He didn't like just make a rash decision on the spot. He went for a walk to just really think this through, and it's like, oh my goodness, what do I do? Take in consideration that he made a decree, and he can't undo the decree. Once the king has spoken, he has spoken. That is law. That's the way it is. So he can't undo that. So he goes to think, and when he returns, when you read this part, it says that Haman, is pleading with Esther for his life. Okay, and is begging. And at the moment that the king returns, he trips and falls on her lap. This is like all God. Like God isn't mentioned, but the amount of God incidents that just happens throughout Esther is amazing. He trips and falls on her lap as the king walks in, and he's like, what the heck? I walk out for a moment and you're coming here to molest my queen? Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in rage, left his wine, and went out to the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. And the king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in my house? In front of my very eyes, if you read it. You know what he does with Haman? Oh man, I should have a chocolate bar stash over here. Anyone knows what he ends up doing with Haman? Diane, you always get the chocolate bar. Anyone else? No? Jonah, you know? No? Are you taking a wild guess? Okay, go for it. What did he end up doing with Haman? He's really thinking through. Oh, come on. I want that chocolate bar. Jonah, you got something for me? Hold on. How much time? It doesn't say on there. Oh, does it? Hold on. Okay, how? How is the question? You're just reading what's up on the screen. How did they kill Haman? They put him on the spear. Do you know what spear they put him on? You got it, Jonah. What's your favorite chocolate bar, little man? You want Pocky? Did he? Oh, Takis. You want a chip bag. Okay, but you get the small bag, not the big bag. He's like, I want that really big. But good win. Good. Anyways, so the same pole that was prepared for Mordecai is the pole that Haman ends up on top of. Come on. Have you ever thought about like justice being served here? It's like after what Haman did, he ends up being on the same pole that they would have put Mordecai on. Right? And so now what begins to happen, right? And you think of like, okay, well, what about all of Israel? How are we going to figure all of this out? And so what happens is the king makes a new decree, and he says, okay, so we said that on March 7th, that all of Israel's enemies can come and attack them. The decree specifically said, if you killed anyone, you got to keep all their lands. So there was like rewards to be involved. Here's the thing. I'm going to make another decree, and so this is like with Mordecai's help. He paraded him before everyone, and he ends up giving them the same honor that Haman had, being like one of the most important people ever, okay? And so Mordecai helps to get the fastest king's horses. I find that awesome because he got to like borrow the king's things in order to get this done. And he makes this decree that Israel is allowed to defend themselves. So it's cool. They know the time that their enemies are going to come and attack, okay? And written down in every language, including the Jewish language, okay, they sent out this decree that Israel is allowed to defend themselves. So as you continue to read, you learn that people were, I guess they're just greedy, and they're just like, oh, if I kill this guy, I get to keep his things, okay? And I don't go to jail or anything. So all of Israel's enemies came before them in hopes of taking them out and taking their things. Except Israel, and it says united, come together in unity and fights against their enemies and kicks butt and wins. So if you can picture that everything culminated to this attack where it looks like, oh boy, Israel's going to get wiped out, and instead Israel ends up wiping out all their enemies. And then it wasn't just on March 7th, but if you read, it says also on March 8th, they decided, let's stay united in case there's anyone left. And they ended up killing, I believe it's another 75,000 people. Okay? All of Israel enemies is gone. And then when you read it, the cool thing is that people had such respect for Israel at that point in time, the Jews, okay, that many of them became Jews. I was just like, that is crazy. That is crazy. You have this whole story unfold to this moment where it looks like Israel's going to get wiped out, where it looks like evil's going to win. Like, you can make movies about stuff like this, okay? You have this just massive culmination, and then God comes through. And all the enemies are identified, taken out, and now Israel ends up like on top out of everything, to such a degree that many people became Jews at that point in time. So again, let me ask you the question. If all of your life you go through all kinds of suffering, you look at it as suffering, God looks at it as preparation, okay, to put you in the right place at the right time to make one decision for Him, in which an entire people could be saved. You may not know how it unfolds. Esther didn't know whether that gold scepter was going to be pointed at her or not, or whether she would have just been murdered on the spot, right? She didn't know, but she was willing to take the chance for God, that one moment. So are you prepared to give your all for God? Are you prepared for that one moment that God has asked of you to go and stand in against all odds, even though it looks like wickedness is about to win? And in the end, you saw what happened. God turned the entire situation for His good, to save His people, not destroy His people. Like, read Esther. Please go home during your week, read it, and enjoy it and be inspired, be encouraged, and prepare yourself. Sometimes God asks of us smaller things throughout our day, throughout our week, throughout the month. Sometimes God asks of us one major moment in our life, or two, or three. I don't know how it's going to pan out in your life, but God, I do know that God has all kinds of good things planned out for us since before we were even born, and I want to be ready for them. I want you guys to be ready for them, okay? And I want you to think about that in your heart, to think about, if I must die, then I must die. But I'm going to go do what God has asked me to do. I don't know how often you guys have been put in a position where God has asked you to sacrifice your life. It doesn't seem to happen very often. So I think for the most part, most of you guys should be able to, God, whatever you can ask of me. My life is in your hands. And I know you'll take care of me throughout it all. But I'm willing to do what you need me to do. Reading my notes there. Yep, that's it. Will you bow your heads? Father God, it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to think about moments like that, to think about people of great courage. But I know that Esther struggled as well. I know that she thought about it and is like, oh my goodness, if I do this, there's a chance I may die. And she weighed it, and she wasn't willing to have her own desires fulfilled. It was being in service to God. And that should be the priority of our lives, Lord. That no matter if we're uncomfortable in a situation or whether things that you ask us to do may seem completely strange, Lord, may we take the chance for you. That embarrassment is a small price to pay in order to do what you have asked us to do. Father God, I pray that we begin to make that commitment in our hearts. That it's not just a one time that we said, Lord, I love you and I give my heart to you, but it's something that we do every single day. It's something that we continue to promise to you. It's something that we live out, not just say, but we look for ways to honor and to serve you, to do the good works that you have planned. An entire people was saved, and an entire nation began to change their hearts and chase after you, Lord, because of what Esther did. God, I pray that you give us the right words, that you give us the right wisdom, the moments to be patient if we need to be patient, and the right words to speak when we need to speak. God, I pray that you speak through all of us into friends, into family around us, so that they can begin to learn about your love. Begin to learn about you, Lord, so that they too may begin to give their hearts for you and see what a beautiful life there is to have, not just here living with you, but for an eternity to look forward to together. God, give us great courage. Give us great boldness, Lord, and a great passion. And again, may we already decide in our hearts that we are all in. I'm just going to give you guys a moment to ponder my prayer in your heart, and for you to recommit or to make a solid commitment for God to be all in. Lord,